Meet Dean Ho, a scientist from the US who moved to Singapore with his family 6 years ago. He is a professor at the National University of Singapore and the head of the Institute for Digital Medicine. Dean shared why Singaporeans live longer than Americans, the secret to building healthy habits, and how to follow a balanced diet on a budget. I'm Max Chernov, your insider to a healthy life. Let's go! I checked the life expectancy in Singapore is 83, in Japan it's like almost 85, in US it's 79. What's the main factors for Singapore, do you think? Why it's 83?
Singapore, first of all, has what I think is an amazing healthcare system. And to elaborate on that a little bit more, I think the training, the experience, the creativity, the innovation from our healthcare providers is remarkable. It's a big reason why I moved here. To think about this even further, healthcare is largely designed on a global scale for the masses. It's a population approach. Our clinicians here, when I say clinicians, I mean the doctors, the nurses, the pharmacists, allied health, all the way down to the patients and their surrounding caregivers. We live in this very accessible ecosystem where if we want to innovate, all the stakeholders are there, all the way to regulatory and policy making. When you put all of these together, our ability to kind of have very hands-on care, but also hands-on care that pushes the envelope to maybe allow for much more hyper-personalized care is indeed special.
Like, can you give me an example, like to understand
Sure.
what it is?
I'll give you an example. I think that one thing that we've been working on for a long time is to improve the types of doses that patients get for their treatment. This can range from cancer patients who conventionally receive very high doses of treatment. We have found ways for the right patients to reduce the doses that actually improve the efficiency of care, but actually reduce the toxicity at the same time. And this has worked not only for cancer, but we're looking at many other diseases as well, including metabolic disease. But even thinking before disease, Singapore is built for a place where people can interact. They can get outside. They can exercise easily here. They can go hiking. Nature is everywhere. And when we think about how well designed this is, it's a city conducive to movement. And when you have that, our goal here is to improve health span, right? Which is our goal is to create less patients at scale, at a population level, and that's why this is such a remarkable place to be. When we start to think about fitness as well, as another example, something that I love is the accessibility of fitness resources everywhere we're here. When I'm out walking, out near Holland Village, and we look at the HDBs and the ability to stop by and do a pull-up, do a dip, and the best part is to get the smiles from the residents. We all kind of look at each other, give each other a smile. That is about as welcoming as it gets. And by the way, it really kind of reduces that barrier, right? There's no kind of, I'm not shy when I do this. When people kind of smile at each other, it kind of builds this community. And being able to walk into a fitness area alone is very intimidating for people. But to kind of get a smile while we walk up, to kind of see people working out together, that perhaps is one of the most special aspects of being here in Singapore. Because first, we have accessibility. You need that, and that's accomplished. But there also needs to kind of be this social disarming, right? This kind of social welcomeness to use these facilities. And that is also here. And some could argue that's at least as important as the accessibility too. Why? Because the availability of resources that are not used will still lead to the same outcomes of health issues arising. But when you have the resources there, plus the welcoming people, that's all you need.
So the walking plays a big role.
Indeed. I think walking, being out and about, physical activity is something that's pretty vital, especially due to the dawn of the digital age where a lot of the information we consume is accessible in our pocket, right, from our phones. The ability to really step out of the house and move become increasingly important.
I actually bought the walking pad recently, like a few months ago already. And it was actually best investment of like $400. So literally every day now I walk at least like 10,000 steps. And it's easy. So before I was like, let's say I'm having a Zoom call with my team. It's like 90 minutes call. I'm just walking. It's like slowly. But then you check the number, it's like, oh, already like 6,000 steps. Super convenient.
The step count is kind of one of those earliest forms of gamifying, of incentivizing better behavior. And when people kind of meet those goals, I think in addition to hitting a target, hitting a number, they'll start to see improved benefits, right? Everything from improving sleep to metabolism, energy levels. And when you put all of these together, it just leads to more time spent in good health with our friends and family.
How many steps, like on average, you should do every day?
I think there's various numbers. Some recent studies have looked at 6,000 or more. I think 10,000 is a commonly used magic number. I think the best number is something that somebody can set for themselves that's maybe starting at 2,000 to 3,000 to 4,000. That's sustainable. I think that we have certain jobs where sitting is highly prevalent, especially with our driving community. It's hard to be able to get up while they're really playing a major role moving the population around. So I think really the best number is to kind of set some smaller targets first and to be able to adhere to those, to stick to those. And once they see themselves sticking to those, they can start ramping them up. It's all about consistency and durability.
What role discipline plays in the overall, like your approach to be healthy versus the habits? Because I think almost everybody at least once tried to push the discipline. Okay, I'm gonna wake up at 6 o'clock and go for a run, but then seems like it's not sustainable. And if you check like the recent like trends in like, let's say, a podcast about health, it feels like people are experts pushing more for building habits versus the discipline. What's your approach?
I think approaching discipline from a standpoint of saying, I'm gonna be disciplined today, I'm gonna be disciplined tomorrow, works for some people, and it can work for them durably. But when I think about how each person is so different from each other, it's really about finding those activities that will kind of organically create that discipline in a way that works for the person. So for me, it's less about saying I will be disciplined versus finding something that I like doing today, that I like doing tomorrow, that I like doing the day after. Okay. And then at the same time, finding little outcomes from those activities that make me happy, very simply make me happy, that make me feel accomplished. And I think at that point, discipline kind of shows up on the other side automatically. One example is myself. I, for my birthday a couple years ago, bought a bunch of devices, from a continuous glucose monitor to a finger prick analyzer for glucose, for ketones. And I actually started this journey thinking I'm gonna be disciplined and collect all this information about myself. And what happened was I went a couple days just staring at these boxes, thinking, how am I gonna start? I have to bleed myself, I have to stick this thing in my arm. And so what happened was I kind of let that time pass. I cleared my head, and one day I got up and said, I bought all this stuff, let's use it. When I started using it, my numbers were underwhelming. I thought to myself, maybe my metabolism's gonna start switching, it's gonna be really cool, I'm gonna get this great data. And it was a bit underwhelming, but once I started using my usual regimen of exercise, of diet, I started to see these immediate changes in my data. And it was seeing that instant gratification of that data change that caused me to say, wow, even this one healthy behavior that I do right now, a 10-second behavior, a 20-second behavior of some push-ups, of some curls, of a walk, I can see immediate gains in the data. And I thought to myself, this is gonna keep me going. And then before I knew it, it's been a few years now. And so I think the discipline showed up organically because I, unbeknownst to myself at the time, found something that could get me to move. So I very much took a reversed approach. I found something that I liked, that I could sustain, and I actually gradually built it up. And from there, discipline was an aftermath.
I totally agree. Like for me, for example, sport. I chose the sports that I like to do. Like for example, I play football every Tuesday for the last 4 years, and it's become a habit, a routine for me.
Yes.
And I love it. And for example, at the gym, I push myself a bit to go to the gym a couple of times a week, but it's not my favorite thing. I already quite enjoy it, but it's not my favorite thing. For my favorite thing is like playing football or playing paddle, and I know that the cardio part I actually cover doing this. right?
That's right. I think the challenge right now with social media, with kind of digital platforms is that everybody has to do this. Everybody's has to be super muscular. Everybody has to eat this type of nutritional regimen. But the reality is we are all so unique from each other that people don't want to hear everybody's different from each other. So you kind of have to find what's unique for yourself. But at the same time, if we kind of sit back, be kind to ourselves, we know ourselves the best, and we think to ourselves, what are things I like to do? The ability to sustain those behaviors while taking care of ourselves is much more powerful than saying, all of these people say I have to do this. That to me is the beginning. It's the recipe of non-compliance, right? I think the best habits that we can have are the ones that we organically find for ourselves that are sustainable. We all have different work schedules, work demands, family life, travel habits. We all know what's possible for ourselves. And if we can really kind of stick with it, that's the best.
Hey guys, just a quick announcement. Don't skip. I'll be running a 3-day workshop called Fast Track to Views and Profits on YouTube. If you ever wanted to start your own channel, this is the best way to do it. You will learn how to choose the most profitable niche and how to beat the YouTube algorithm. You're gonna love it, I promise. Link in description, so sign up if it's for you. And now back to the video. What's the most unnoticed, unhealthy habits that many people have?
Sugar consumption. And the reason is, I think there's a perception that sugar only exists in things that are sweet. But if we look at kind of our daily regimens, some of the carbohydrates that are taken in, such as the breads, at a general level, the noodles, and especially being in a region where metabolic disease and chronic disease are issues, I think there's important lessons to take away about where some of these sugars exist. This is not to demonize enjoying good food. It's about kind of just being aware of where some of these kind of hidden challenges may exist and maybe being a bit more mindful.
Can you explain in simple words why sugar is bad?
Being, especially in this part of the world, when sugar consumption, especially as we get older, is overconsumed, it starts to kind of dysregulate things like our metabolism, our ability to eventually lower that blood sugar in our system. And when that process gets disrupted, issues like diabetes, heart disease can start to emerge. The challenge is a lot of these sugars at a population level are consumed when people are young, and they become habits as well. And when the habits become so ingrained and hard to break, this is why we start to see increased incidence of prediabetes and diabetes. Essentially, it's our ability to regulate our blood sugar. And part of being able to address that early is to let people know where are these sugars hidden. And it's not always apparent to the population where they are. So some education and some awareness helps a lot.
What's the most common food here in the region where you can find sugar?
I think one of the most common foods is white rice, for example, and noodles. Again, this is
any type of noodles?
Typically, the most common noodles that we'll find are the rice noodles and the white rice. But at the same time, it's a staple. We talk a lot about habits. I think suddenly telling people cut all rice out of your diet, cut all noodles out of your diet is not a suitable way to try to drive better behavior. In fact, when that happens, when people deprive themselves of foods that make them happy, of foods that bring people together to socialize, there can be an overcompensation that happens later.
Yeah.
And then people will consume even more, right? So it's about balance. And there's something that I do to try to manage this. People know that one of my favorite foods here is chicken rice. And I've never met a chicken rice I didn't like. I've never met a chicken rice I didn't like. But one thing I will do is, and I apologize to all my friends who also love chicken rice, but I will often order the chicken rice without the rice, okay, even though I love the rice. But what I will do is every few times that I eat the chicken, I will still take the sauces and I'll take the vegetables with it. Every few times that I eat it, I will treat myself to a full-fledged chicken rice. And sometimes on my flights, when I have 2 meals available, I'll take 2 chicken rices, right? Because I gamify my own reward system for being good, for being able to enjoy and honor the amazing food that we have here, but doing so in a way that I might be able to enjoy them much longer during the course and many more times during the course of my time. Right, and so it's really about finding that balance.
What I noticed in the comments after our first video, like people say, okay, you can eat healthy, but you need resources, you need budget, you need money for it. So like why rice exists, like here in this region is like rice and noodles, in Russia and in Europe is potato. So it's the easy way to get energy, like maybe not the best energy, but that's the way. And then if you want, okay, I want like my meat, my fish, and my vegetables, it will be much more expensive. So, and I think that's the kind of the problem. I'm sure there are misconceptions how like you can eat healthy but cheaply, but it's still a problem, I think.
That's a great point. I think that very candidly speaking on a global scale, access to healthy food, and when we say healthy, if we think about organic, grass-fed, free range, it's expensive. Accessibility is a huge challenge. And I think it's important to be very candid about that, and I think people know that, right? That eating healthy, paying attention to the sourcing of the food implicitly creates a barrier. And so I think that there's also a perception that the only way to have energy is to consume a lot of carbohydrates. And I think what we're trying to work on is to show how moderate carbohydrate intake, not total restriction, but moderate carbohydrate intake can still lead to strong human performance, to strong sleep, to strong mental health, the ability to continue socializing with our loved ones as well. So at the same time, I think it's about trying to co-create. Right? I think co-creation we often think of in a technological context where if we want to come up with a wearable, a new app, we should do co-creation with the population we're trying to help. I think that nutrition regimens need to be co-created as well. And that's actually exactly what we are doing. We're working with one of the platforms here, Blue Cuisine, for example, to co-create a nutrition regimen, but we're going to be very candid, right? That we're not trying to create a healthy meal that's $50 per meal, right? There is a time and place for fine dining, for really, to treating ourselves.
Yeah.
But what we love about the partnerships with them and other partners that we have is to co-create, to look at acceptability of food that is accessible to all. And to do that, it's not so much about saying you must eat grass-fed or this type of category of food. It's about maybe we can dial down the refined sugar. Maybe we can up the healthy fats, which are an important energy source as well. What are healthy fats? And once we start ramping these studies up, there's something we want to do. We want to build evidence that healthy food, when consumed, say, earlier, accessible healthy food, when consumed earlier, can lead to better habits early on. And when better habits are taken up early, we maybe can create less patients. And maybe the cost, or even down the road, potential subsidies for healthy food will outperform subsidies for healthcare, right? And we are working with the population, the general population for this. I'll be the first person to say that eating healthy is expensive. It's tough to reach for a vast majority of the population. We're going to try to find a way to bridge that accessibility without demonizing types of foods, without wholesale correction of what's out there in the community. It's about looking methodically at ways where we can dial something back and add something in, and doing this in a way that's actually acceptable to the population. First, we have to be candid, then we have to be systematic about it, then we have to work together to co-create something, and then start looking for ways to sustain those healthy behaviors.
You mentioned that people are different, people are built different, people are born different. What part of, like, I want to be healthy, I want to have healthy lifestyle, what part is the genes, how I was born, and what part is what I can actually build for myself?
When we look at things like epigenetics and what's predestined and where we still have a chance, there's a lot of research going into what proportion of our lives can be changed by our habits. I think that without quoting specific numbers, I think the general consensus is a major portion of our health outcomes can be determined by our behavior. And this is why it is so critical to start thinking about these behaviors early. You mentioned earlier about the lifespan, right? Lifespan in Singapore, our region is growing, but the health span, our areas, we're also working to extend as well so that the later stages of life are spent in better health. The reality is if, say, the health span kind of starts to decline at the age of 74, for example, we know that it will be a big challenge to go to a 73-year-old and say, guess what? Statistically, starting next year, your health will really start to decline. So let's hit the gym, let's start eating healthy, let's start walking more. We know that that is a challenge. It's critical to certainly help our senior community, and we're doing that. But it's also important to start thinking about the younger population. And back to your question about genetics, I think the value of good behavior is important. It's even more potent if we start to undertake those efforts earlier on in life. The challenge is when we have the ability to kind of play a big role in guiding our health outcomes in the long term, when people are younger, they probably have less incentive to act well. When we're younger, we can eat a lot of junk food and we don't feel the pain. When we're younger and we eat a lot of junk food, we can wake up the next morning as if nothing happened. You and I know if I eat a whole pizza one day, I'm probably not going to feel great the next morning. But young people don't have those effects. And so I think it's important when we think about our role in guiding our health outcomes by behavior-driven impact on our genetics, etc., starting early matters, right? It's not about starting when people are older, it's about starting younger.
Do I need to do any blood tests to understand okay, what suits me, what fits me in terms of nutrition and everything else?
Right now, there are many different varieties of blood tests that are out there. That are some that look at a lot of markers and can give a lot of insights. And there are some blood tests where very targeted markers are looked at, such as cardiovascular risk, kidney health, liver health, gut health, etc. I think that people, first of all, don't look at their numbers enough. I think at a population level, there are people that don't look at their numbers. They're basically 0 times a year.
Yeah.
And there are those who might look once a year. And I think with the major initiatives that are being launched, it's important to have more ownership over one's health. What I like to do, for example, is to look at less markers, and I focus on cardiovascular risk. I also look at gut health. And the reason for that is I think looking at gut health is actually fun. And when we talk about habit, we talk about how we find paddle fun or playing football fun. For me, it's lifting weights and cardio being fun. I think being able to look at certain biomarker testing, the ones that we're maybe less afraid of to get, we can start to gamify adherence there too. So I'm not so afraid of my cardiovascular risk. I'm not so afraid of my metabolic health risk. I'm also not so afraid of my gut health risk. But these are all important to still look at. And because I've already disarmed this kind of fear of looking at this information, this has allowed me to take very frequent tests of less markers. Why? Because I think it's cool. Now we have all these really neat tests where you can look at a lot of markers. But those tests will matter more or help more if people do them longitudinally over time. Because it's really important to look at the change over time as a function of our behavior. If we look at many markers one time a year, what we're going to potentially find is people don't come back for the next year or the year after that. And I think that's a pity. So if we can look at less markers more frequently, we can not only get some really neat insights into how our activities are influencing our outcomes, but it actually can become a gamification tool. Our ability to kind of reward ourselves to see the benefits of our better behavior. Final thing I'll mention is that when we kind of look at less markers over time, the accessibility might be a bit better too, right, in terms of cost. And I think all of these play a role. The economics of ownership over one's health, the ability to get new types of information that are valuable for the patient and the doctor, all of these matter. And to give you a number, I probably take some of my markers 10 times a year at least, but it's really a couple of markers, 2 or 3 markers that I'm interested in, like ApoB, ApoA, which are markers for our heart health. I look at those because of things like how they're affected when I fast, which we'll get into. I also have started looking at my gut health over time as a function of fasting, also as a function of different types of diets that I'm working on.
Okay, so your recommendation would be to do the blood test like let's say every quarter, something like that?
If it's economically feasible, and if somebody is undertaking interventions, and when I say interventions, it could be certain fasting regimens, certain exercise regimens, in consultation with their doctor to look a bit more frequently. Some of these dynamics, how these things change over time, once a quarter, 3-4 times a year maybe, can yield some really valuable insights. And there's a reason for that. Sometimes certain numbers are a little high. And I have this saying that we're often viewed as snapshots, right? Where a single reading is used to guide our care for the year. But what we really are stories. If we kind of look at how we evolve over different diets, over different exercise regimens, when we kind of view that evolution, I think it ultimately helps the doctor and it helps the patient.
For a normal person, not as extreme as you, what's the markers I should look at? Like, let's say 5 or 7 markers, the main ones.
The first thing to do is consult with a doctor to see where the risks might lie for somebody.
Yeah.
But from a cardiovascular standpoint, because I think if we look at things like prevalence of heart disease, I think starting with a lipid panel helps. Lipid panel, LDL, HDL, triglycerides, total cholesterol. On top of that, I think we're starting to see an increased look at apolipoprotein B and apolipoprotein A, also known as ApoB and ApoA. So if you do a lipid panel, ApoB, ApoA together, I think we get really good insights into our general cardiovascular risk. There are even more definitive ways to look, but a lot of those involve imaging. And the challenge is a lot of people are quite intimidated by that. And so the ability to walk into a lab and get some easier readings out matters. There are other easier consumer-driven ways to look at things like blood glucose and blood ketones for generally healthy individuals to look at their metabolism. So you have some consumer routes, you have some lab routes, but looking at a general picture of heart health is a good way to start.
Do you also mention gut health? Gut health?
Yes.
What markers?
Gut health is really interesting. We're working with a really exciting company called Amalie on this. And gut health actually looks at a broad range of microbes. Our friends that live in our gut that are implicated in heart health as well, that are implicated in metabolic health, our ability to stave off diabetes, our ability to stave off Crohn's disease and colitis. And what happens is each of these tests gives great broad insight into how our gut is composed of these microbes. And something that's really neat is our ability to look at a comparison of our individual gut health compared to the population. And what happens is when we start to look at this, it'll give us insights into maybe some of the microbes that we are lacking and maybe some of the foods that we can eat to improve the balance and the diversity of our gut. And this is important because recent studies are starting to really elaborate on the connection between our gut and so many different facets of our health elsewhere in the body, including our heart, including our brain. And so I think it's still kind of in the earlier phases of this work, but the beauty of it is it's as a person who is really interested in looking at my systemic health, it's an area that we've derived a lot of really cool insights into.
Do I do a blood test or it's different type of test?
When looking at gut health, It's how one might assume you need to look at gut health. And so it's typically done with a stool sample. But it's a really easy process to do it. And I'm successful every time in making sure I collect what I need to collect. Some samples can also be taken from saliva, so it is quite convenient. But for those interested, when looking for gut health, generally the more widespread method is from a stool sample.
You advocating big time about fasting, right? Can you explain what you do? Like, you are the most extreme fasting person I know, but like, tell me what you do and tell me why fasting is so important, you think?
Fasting is something that I do. I should note that it's actually not for everybody. Some people need to fast less than others. Some people shouldn't fast at all. And I would say everybody who's interested in fasting should consult a medical professional to make sure that their metabolism is okay, that they're not pre-diabetic, that they're not diabetic, because there are profound issues that can be encountered when people fast when they shouldn't. Yeah. I think that there are studies emerging that men and women should fast differently. And there's also evidence that some people who can fast should not fast during certain times of the month as well. So I wanted to really emphasize this important point. When I look at myself, I fast because I'm really interested in my metabolic health. Metabolic disease is quite prevalent in the region, and the incidence is increasing globally. And the challenge is it's also increasing in young people. And at the heart of why I'm doing this, I actually wanted to collect a data set that was unique, that was safe to acquire, but also unique. And so my work is actually regulated and approved by an ethics board. When I fast, what's important is certain biomarkers in my blood rise. It's quite common, it's well known, things such as ketones. Right? Ketones are byproducts, essentially, of when we use fat as an energy source. When I fast, I observe what's called metabolic switch. That's a process whereby our body switches from things like sugar as our primary energy source to fat. Studies are starting to look at the role of this switch as an indicator for our metabolic health, our metabolic fitness over time. There's some implications that maybe it becomes a bit more challenging over time to flip or to switch as we get older, and it takes some effort to get there. And so I kind of treat it as a metabolic exercise. And when I do this, it's actually quite straightforward for me to monitor, because we have kits that can be bought off the shelf to look at blood glucose and blood ketones. And I find that fasting for me is one of these catalysts to allow me to reach that switch faster.
Yeah.
I have a lot of data on this.
What fasting do you do?
People know that my typical fasting regimen is 20 hours a day, approximately. I basically only eat between 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. And that's general. Sometimes I might shift it a little bit earlier. Sometimes I'll shift it a little bit later. Sometimes when I'm on travel, I might, especially with family, I might do 2 meals a day, but still kind of packaged together. But by and large, my regimen is 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. And when I do that, I do this because I want to finish eating well before I go to sleep, which is about 9 to 9:30, because I kind of want my digestion to be kind of completed at that time, so I can my body can focus on sleep. At certain times, maybe about once a month, sometimes up to 2 times a month, I will fast for 48 hours. And all of these fasts are water fasts, which means I totally can consume water. Sometimes I consume a little bit of black coffee, maybe some black tea, but to avoid any sort of reflux, I will generally just stick to water and maybe some electrolytes. And I used to fast 72 hours. I don't do that as often anymore, but I will say I'm not the most extreme faster on the planet. There are some people who fast a week, and that really takes medical oversight. And the reason is, as we age, we lose muscle. And something I don't want to do is for the fasting and metabolic health exercise to lead to muscle loss. Because I think for those, many don't know that while muscles give us strength, they are also a mechanism for metabolic health as well. And so it's all about that balance. But 20 hours a day is my general regimen.
How to fast without like losing fat, but not losing muscle?
I think our body prioritizes how it uses energy. And I think not fasting for too long continuously is pretty important for not losing muscle. At the same time, for those who are allowed to fast, who are safe to fast, I wouldn't recommend going straight to 20 hours. The reason is there have actually been studies showing that people who fast can end up less healthy than those who don't fast. And the reason is how we break the fast is as important as the fast itself, right? That's something I always emphasize. How we break the fast, what we eat after finishing the fast, is as important as the fast itself. And the reason is when people have been shown to end up less healthy, what happens is they'll do the fast and then they'll end up eating more fast food afterwards. There have been some studies, if I remember correctly, there was one on smoking, where some people end up smoking more after fasting than less. And that's this matter of maybe driving it a bit too hard. And that's why kind of over deprivation can have negative impact. Hence, if people want to start fasting, don't be too intense. Start with 12 hours. And if people feel comfortable, and by the way, 12 is not easy for some people. We don't want people to suffer, right? We really don't want people to be in so much agony that it's a really poor experience. If people can do 12, they can maybe start upping it to 14. And this is exactly what I did. From 14 went to 16. And then the 16-hour fast is a very common one. 16-8.
16-8.
16 hours without food, 8 hours with food. And a common schedule for that is skipping breakfast, right? Skipping breakfast, and then between the hours of 12 to 8 p.m., they consume food. Some people will flip it to the morning where they have breakfast and they have lunch, but maybe they don't have dinner. But it's about kind of this 16 hours continuous. For me, I went from 16 hours to 18 hours. Then from 18 hours, I went to 20 hours. I can easily go 24 hours if needed. And a popular question I get is, I will stick with the fasting regimens, especially when I travel by myself on the road, when I fly. I can even gamify that process while I'm in flight as well.
What happens with the human body while fasting? Like, can you explain?
When we start to fast, our body starts to use up kind of the stored sugar in our system. And when kind of the sugar is at a more depleted level, our body will metabolically switch to fat usage for energy. This is that metabolic switching process. Metabolic switching is kind of our body's ability to convert between different energy sources. This can be measured over time. If I'm starting to fast and my body has sugar in the system, maybe I had some sourdough bread, maybe I had some rolled oats, and I measure my blood, I can see my glucose levels might be kind of at a more average level. As I fast and I collect my glucose, I'll start to see the glucose decrease. And when I start to see it decrease, over time, I'll start to see my ketones, which are the byproduct of breaking down fat, I'll start to see that increase. This is that metabolic switching process. And I think that our body's ability to do this is an interesting measure for our metabolic health.
I guess for many people, the hardest part is like they start feeling hungry when they fast. Any tricks how to avoid it?
Staying busy. I think staying busy helps. Something that I love doing when I'm fasting is hanging out with friends. And my friends who are very dear to me, periodically we kind of get together and watch some fun shows on TV. And they can eat. They know I probably won't be eating, but just merely hanging out with them and just catching up on life gets me through. And part of it, I will say, is there is some mental fortitude, but that's not so different from going to work out, right? I think we've all woken up in mornings or kind of felt that afternoon lull where we really just don't want to go to the gym. We don't want to go for that run. We don't want to generate that movement, but sometimes we do it. We do it, and we feel quite accomplished when it's done. And for me, the fasting process, it's not always like this. It's pretty routine for me, but there are certain times where I'm traveling and maybe I want to indulge in something, but I know it's probably not the best for me, and I feel a sense of accomplishment when I know that I can kind of overcome that urge for junk food. But to be fair, sometimes we earn it as well. Let's be kind to ourselves. But I think that for us, fasting is a sort of metabolic fitness. It's metabolic exercise when safe. And it's very similar to physical exercise, right? And I think part of it is a mental game. It feels pretty cool when I've accomplished something.
What must always be in your fridge? Maybe like some 3-5 products.
What's in my fridge and pantry? I'm gonna start with ginger. My friends and I have a laugh about this. I like eating old ginger. Sometimes I like chewing on it. Sometimes I like blending it into drinks. So that's something that I commonly use. And I like ginger in cooking as well. Eggs. I consume a lot of eggs. I typically will consume a lot of egg white. I will still put in some yolk, but we have a lot of eggs in our fridge. I will generally have some type of green vegetable. It'll be kale, it will be cucumber, it will be spinach. I'll generally have broccoli as well. I'll have something green. Sometimes I have red cabbage. It's something that I do often mix into my shakes as well. And blueberries. As you can kind of gather from what I've mentioned here, I've got protein. I also have very diverse types of colors of food. And that plays into everything from our heart health all the way to our gut health. And I think those are the things you're gonna always find in my fridge. In my pantry, I will mention that I always have chia seed, I always have flaxseed, I always have some cacao, which strong antioxidant. And then I will generally mix those either sometimes with water or with an unsweetened almond milk. And that's pretty much something I consume almost every single day. Also for heart health, also for gut health. Quite accessible as well.
If you drink alcohol, what's the safest alcohol to drink?
That's probably one of the most popular questions I get. And I will say that I now more or less don't drink alcohol at all anymore. I will say that it depends on the individual. I think that's not the easiest answer, but I will say that some of the alcohols out there are lower in carb, and these are actually some of the harder liquors, right? Lower in carb for those who want to watch their carbs. There has been some work looking at red wine. I think that a big proportion of the population is familiar with for potential heart health. I will say this, we don't want to demonize people who enjoy a drink with their friends at all, right? We don't want to do that. We don't want to tell people quit cold turkey immediately, give up all alcohol tomorrow, because it's a part of life for many people. But at the same time, there's also this notion of let's drink red wine to be good for our heart. One can also go for a walk and have it help the heart. One can also go for a run. One can go swimming. One can go cycling, play football. So there are other ways to do it. I don't think we want to overconsume any of this with the quest or the notion of improving our heart health. But I will say that looking at options that people can enjoy the easiest in moderation is probably the best. I think that from a habit standpoint, if there are certain alcohols that tend to end up in mixed drinks where a lot of sugar comes in, best to avoid those and maybe stick with a wine. If somebody kind of is okay nursing a single something on the rocks versus consuming 5 glasses of a wine, try to stick with something that is easiest to look at in moderation. Still preserves the social vibe as well, but you can also look out for yourself at the same time. So it's not full-on quitting for those who don't want to do it, but it's something that brings balance to their social life as well.
Beer? What about beer?
Beer is higher in carb, and so that's something where if it's something that can be consumed in moderation, probably a good idea. There's emerging research, quite a bit actually, in recent times, that the role of alcohol in chronic disease, metabolic disease, the fact that as people start to consume earlier in life when they're in their 20s and it becomes a habit, the long-term effects can be a bit of a challenge without demonizing it. So when we look at alcohol plus carbohydrate intake, and this is back to metabolic health, the carb intake, beer has carbs. Typically, right? Depending on there's different types of beers out there, something to try to do in moderation if possible.
Vitamins, should I consume them? Should I get them?
Yes. For some, important to talk to the healthcare provider about. A multivitamin is something that I consume every day. Maybe I'll speak to myself first. Multivitamin every day, which contains kind of your standard B vitamins, vitamin D, zinc, some lycopene as an example. I do take creatine. I don't take a very high dose. I do take in a vitamin D supplement as well, in addition, to make sure I get enough. I also consume omega-3. And then something I'm looking at is actually a probiotic to see if it actually has an impact on my gut health. Something to note is that there's a predisposition sometimes to kind of read online that a supplement is good, and then people will just add it to their regimen. Then they read something else is good and they'll add it to the regimen, and by the end of the day, somebody might be consuming 50 different supplements. The reality is supplements can interact with each other. So we're going to want to be careful about stacking on too many supplements, because supplements can also cause health issues when the wrong supplements are taken. It's also important to look at the sourcing of the supplements. There have been supplements that maybe have some sort of additive or something that shouldn't be there. So it's really important to look at supplements that come from trusted and tested sources. Always good to consult with a doctor on this, because some people have kidney health issues they have to watch out for, so they might need to stay away from something else. And so by and large, I think making sure that we don't consume everything under the sun, and also looking at ones that maybe are more suitable for us. If someone's, looking at heart health, omega-3s. But by and large, I think vitamin D deficiency is pretty common in people, so that's one that turns up a lot.
Regarding exercise, any universal formula you can give to people, let's say 2 times gym for muscles, 2 times cardio, like running, or how you approach it?
I'll play it safe first, but then I'll get into details.
Yeah.
I think that coming up with a gym regimen that is sustainable, very much like what I've mentioned with food, etc., coming up with one that's sustainable is probably first and foremost critical. Because if you look at the different walks of life, different schedules, different family life, etc., being able to get into the gym is different for everybody. That being said, strength training is important. The ability to do resistance training and to stick with it is important, because frailty, especially in our community here, is increasingly becoming a challenge. And when we think about frailty, certainly fall risk down the road is important, but the role of muscle in metabolic health, because as we talked about, it's kind of one of our energy stores, energy usage machines. It's important to have muscle, and we start to lose muscle as we age. So to do this, maybe I'll give an example of what I do for myself. I believe in, at least 2 to 3 sets, right? 2 to 3 sets of repetitions in kind of the 8 to 10 repetition range. If somebody's lifting a weight and they're doing 50 repetitions with it, it might be a little light for them, right? So when we're looking at resistance training, I like the kind of 8 to 10 repetitions range, 2 to 3 sets at least. Some people can tolerate more volume, where they're doing 4 sets, 5 sets or more. There are people who also like to lift very heavy weight. I will say that there are studies looking at, really heavy weight, and in combination with more repetitions and its role in hypertrophy, right? Being able to build larger muscles. To do this, I actually do some form of strength training at least 5 days a week for myself. Not necessary for everybody. And the reason for that is because I typically focus on one muscle group per session. I'll do kind of arms, biceps one day, maybe focus on triceps a little bit more the next day. I'll do back focused one day, chest focused another day, shoulders another day, and then of course I'll interlace cardiovascular training as well. That's what works for me, and that's what I've been able to stick with for years now.
Do I need a PT, personal trainer?
For somebody who hasn't lifted before, probably a good idea to start with one, because this is where we can kind of learn which exercises are best for us. And there's something that is pretty neat if we meet with somebody who is versed in fitness, is this is a route where we can start to find out which gym exercises we like. I tend to find everybody kind of has their favorite. And when that happens, I'll tell everybody, this is how I sort of gamify my adherence. As I mentioned earlier, there are days we just don't want to go. Okay, it's raining outside, we're tired, It might be a weekend. I get myself in on days when I really don't want to go by knowing which exercises I like to work, and I'll just go in and do that exercise. For me, it's triceps. You can't stop me from working triceps. And you know what? Triceps can be done with dumbbells too, which I have at home, right? So some days I really just don't want to go into the gym, but I'm staring in my living room and I've got a dumbbell there. It's not super heavy. I'll just do triceps that day. And guess what? When I start with the triceps, I'll stick with it. And then you know what? I'll finish out the workout. And sometimes I actually end up going into the gym after I kind of have woken myself up doing the exercise I like, right? And so this is why the kind of benefits of talking to somebody who kind of knows the ranges of different exercises out there lets us get a feel for everything so we can find what we really like to do.
I think it's also a good idea to like decrease the infrastructure barriers. Like if you want to play guitar, you have guitar next to you, not like somewhere sitting on the shelf, right? This is the same.
That's a great point. I amassed a small collection of weights. And by the way, I'll mention something that I think a lot of people don't know about me, is I actually don't belong to a gym. I have no gym membership. We have amazing gyms, by the way, in Singapore. Amazing local gyms and chains that have been set up to really get the population moving. But I actually have zero gym membership. I have a great condo gym. And I've, over the years, been able to find ways, you know, you change the angle of this bench and you use a dumbbell, you can do a preacher curl with it. And I've pretty much found everything I need to do in even a condo gym. At the same time, I have some dumbbells, and as you mentioned, they're sitting kind of right underneath my television. And I do that for a reason, because sometimes I'm sitting there watching a show, I see the dumbbell staring at me, I'll do some light dumbbell repetitions. That accessibility, lowering the barrier helps. Yeah. I will say that for some people, only having something in their house can also disincentivize, where they're like, you know, it's my house, I don't really want to work out at my house. But kind of having some distribution. HDBs have amazing workout facilities. Maybe if someone has a condo facility, maybe someone does belong to a gym and they can only work out while they're there. But kind of having this distribution around can really help us kind of boost that access and keep the healthy behaviors going.
Can you give maybe some motivational advice for our audience if they want to get healthy, like maybe do more exercise or like do the checkups? Anything that maybe something easy, like a first steps, or like how they should approach this journey?
I was at a meeting the other day, a big tech conference, and when I was headed home, I don't drive, so I only use Grab. And I always ask first thing when I get into the car, how are you doing? How's your week going? Yeah. And the driver immediately turned around and said, hey, you know, you're not originally from here, are you? I said, well, you know, I've been living here for many years. Yeah. And then he looked at me and he said, are you the guy who was on Max Chernoff's show? I said, yeah. And he said, didn't you guys talk about health and fitness and longevity and optimization? I said, yes. And he basically said he dramatically reduced everything from alcohol to unhealthy food intake. He started consistently working out, and he had lost several kilograms as a result and kind of reset his life. And so it really made my day to talk about how some of our discussions together could reach people who are from all walks of life. In particular, people who maybe have inconsistent sleep and work schedules that can find ways to adapt what we were talking about to their daily routine and to see real results. The first step towards better health that might be a good way to start is to slowly cut back on refined sugar. I think that's what kicked off the journey for me. I started removing sugar from my coffee. And that was a habit, to be honest, that wasn't easy, but it led to my own stacking of more habits that ultimately changed my health profile completely. It took time, but that's okay. It's something that started simple, took some time to get used to, and then overall, it started creating a much healthier me. The next thing I'll mention is why I'm doing this. I think that certainly for research value, for data, for artificial intelligence and how we can use data to improve our health, that's the work that we do. And we share and we publish those findings. What a lot of people maybe don't know about the core reason for why I'm doing this is because, especially with everything, my wife's health, and even kind of seeing how my children handled my wife's health challenges. And then looking at the community here in Singapore that embraced my family the minute we moved here, both with supporting my wife, my own team here, supporting me every step of the way. This journey really became my wish for everyone to be with their own family and their own loved ones and their own friends longer and with good health. And what I mean by that is when I kind of do my fasting and I do my exercise and I do my stringent nutrition, I'm not doing that to say everybody should do that. I'm actually doing this at a level because it's a really interesting data set that kind of just gives a good, stable health status that lets us look at what good things can happen when we try different facets of nutrition, plunging, exercise, cardio, etc. It's really kind of an encyclopedia of healthy behavior. But what I'm really hoping for, if it's possible, is somebody to say, oh, you know what, I'm willing to try removing sugar. I didn't know that doing some weightlifting 3 times a week, 2 times a week was not actually that hard. Or I feel good. Or I didn't know that I enjoyed this particular exercise this much. That's something that will get me off the couch. I didn't realize that I could fast for 12 hours or 13 hours, and actually it helped me feel better. And so I want to kind of create this journey where I simply want my friends, family, and my loved ones to be healthy, to be happy, to be able to share new memories with their loved ones, and to be able to repeat memories that they loved before. You know, the other day I was on this road trip, with amazing colleagues, and I actually was on the road traveling through areas I used to frequent when I used to live in that region of the world. And I thought to myself, I used to drive this road with my wife before we had kids. How cool would it be to be able to relive that memory again, to make sure she's in good health, I'm in good health, our kids are now with us and that they're in good health. It's really about memories and being able to make new ones, relive ones that we loved, and for maybe people to derive some tips that can make them happier.